Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Man Up Podcast. The Man Up Podcast bringing empowerment today to today's man in the world, showing us how we might need to man up and show up in our world. Not the conventional way of manning up as we once knew it. It wasn't soldier on, eat meals for breakfast and run on broken glass. We understand there's a certain capacity and responsibility, but what we're focusing here today is working out ways that we can come back and show up in different areas, maybe in the mind, body, and spirit, being better in our family life, being better as fathers, husbands, brothers, uncles, whatever we are in the community. We're manning up in not the ways that we've always shown to man the way up. So today I'm very excited. Guest on today we're going to call this episode Beyond the Badge. And what Beyond the Badge represents is certain people in today's society wear certain hats, uniforms, and have certain titles, but who are these individuals before and beyond these calls of duty? For myself, guest on today is someone that's a real dear personal connection, and very grateful to have a wonderful person on today. Mr. Tim Wilkinson resided at the Richmond Fire Rescue, was the current fire chief during my tenure. Tim and I have known each other for over 20 years, literally from the ranks, myself as a probationary firefighter, all the way up to an officer, and very proud and grateful to have Tim on today. Going to give us some amazing perspective from his tenure, again, from a first probationary firefighter all the way up to a fire chief, and some amazing tenures along the way. So very grateful today to be on, and thanks so much for coming on today, Tim.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Kyle. It's great to be a part of this, and thanks so much for actually hosting these podcasts.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. As I say, Tim and I have spoken a little bit personally, and my sort of transition from suppression firefighting into sort of trying to show up in a different way to provide what I would say service to the individuals in the world that in a different way. So Tim's always been a great resource. He's been a mentor of mine. He's been an influence of mine as a senior firefighter, as an officer, as a chief, as my union president, and many hats he's worn along the way. So it's a great perspective and great resource for us to have on today. And look forward to our discussion today, Tim. Maybe if I could just ask you just to kindly maybe give us a little bit of introduction, who you are and how many years young are you, and everything that kind of brings you to the table today.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Well, I've had a wonderful life so far of 66 years, and my career has been sort of wide and varied, starting from I was actually a pipe fitter and worked on the pipelines for about
Oh,
10 years before I
I
got
didn't
onto
know
the fire
that.
department. And
Interesting.
so I
Okay.
went through my trades training, and which was in those days, that was the way you got onto the fire department. Tradespeople
Right.
were highly sought after, and at the time there was really not much work around. And so friends said, "Hey, you would love being a part of the department." And so I went, "Yeah, okay, let's give it a shot."
What year was
But
that, Tim?
that was 1986. I was
Okay.
started, and I was fortunate enough to have a 36-year career
Yes, you
where
were.
I worked at almost every rank in the fire department, which was really fortunate, all the way from a probationary firefighter to actually, at the end of the day, the fire chief. And all of
Wow.
those were wonderful opportunities to learn, to share, to be a part of people's lives. And
Hmm.
while I was working through that career, I was also fortunate enough to be a part of the International Firefighters Union, where
Hmm.
I went through those ranks as well and became president of our union, our local union, and a vice president of the provincial union, and even all the way into the international, where I was a party to many actual committees. So that wide and varied experience um, allowed me to see and understand a lot of different perspectives,
Hmm.
and be able to move my way uh, through my career in a functional and proper way. But that's all
Hmm.
because of people supporting me and giving me opportunity, and then of course taking the opportunity and making the
Fair.
best of it.
Stepping out. I just think for the viewers and listeners at home, understanding the sort of nuance between a suppression active member, meaning you're on the job, attending calls, being a firefighter, and then sitting as a union president, we have something that's sort of become the sort of employer union relationship. And there's a lot of negotiations that come through that to do with employment, salaries, benefits, and everything. Sort of, I won't say a battle. It's a harmonious relationship, but it can be a tumultuous one. And having a very unique perspective from Tim that's literally sat on both sides of the coin, I think that brings a lot of interesting perspective today. So that's a detail that should probably be specified. Most people don't understand that relationship.
Well, I think, thanks for that. I think one of those perspectives, I think a lot of people think of the union management relationship as one that is at odds. Where I think
Mm-hmm.
the reality is you shouldn't be at odds. You should be focused on the issues and what are the
Mm-hmm.
solutions to the
Mm-hmm.
issues. Now we may take different roads to a
Fair.
final goal, but we're working towards the final goal, which is to have the people we're either employing or we're representing to have the best life they can have. So when you keep that into perspective, when the people that you're working with and for are the center,
Yeah.
then it's easy. You shouldn't be fighting because they're the ones who are going to be hurt or made better.
Well, it's gonna sound like a bit of a bromance here, Tim, but I truly appreciate your perspective on that. And unfortunately, I think you might be able to agree that it might not be mirrored by a lot of people in that same sentiment. So I do appreciate your view on that and your openness and being an employee, a member, being of experience, Tim, as a leader, but also union president, both. You did embody that, and policies were always looked at fairly. Even though there'd almost be controversy tried to be sparked, I think Tim did a very good job of always trying to be a sort of a neutral party and such, and look at the topics and the issues as opposed to who's on each side. So hats off to you there, Chief. You did a great job.
Well, thank you, Kyle. It was really important for me to make sure that I was always centered and
Mm-hmm.
I think this is something that is really helpful in your programs is this mindfulness and mindfulness to me was making sure I was always focused on what
Mm-hmm.
was right and what was the real end goal. And it can be
Fair.
simple. It can be really simple. It doesn't have to be complex.
Great point. And coming to the table in a grounded space, in a confident, grounded space, as you, the individual, now open to have a neutral perspective to hear the arguments. But when we come to the table loaded with our own personal agenda, whether it's an argument we had at home before we showed up or a political influence from somewhere else, we come with a loaded argument. So I appreciate the mindfulness aspect can be simply just coming to the table with an open mind, built on practices that we have in our personal life. And we'll get into that shortly, but I appreciate
Yeah.
that mention.
I, I,
Uh,
I think that's
yeah.
great, Kyle. I think the one thing we sometimes worry about is ego.
Mm,
Ego can be good in terms of you have a positive outlook on yourself and grounded,
sure.
but it can be dangerous if
Mm.
you're guarding your ego rather than you're just a confident person who is confident enough to hear another person. And that
The
that part of the ego is important.
There's a very valuable word being used. I'll use it right now. The word vulnerability as well. For us to be vulnerable and put ourselves in positions in a confident space, showing vulnerability is not a weakness. For some people that are not confident, vulnerability is showing weakness, and that part can never happen. Great piece to speak on. That could probably be a whole episode right there,
It
especially
sure could.
in the male domain. And ego is a big one to touch on it too, Tim. And that's something I've learned a lot about in the last couple of years on my sort of health and wellness exploration. Um, Again, you touched on very eloquently, but you sort of like no big deal. Wearing all those hats, Tim, from a probationary firefighter, we'll just give the structure really quickly here, not to bore the viewers at home, but a lot of people don't understand the sort of the hierarchy of how a fire department works. And it still rings true today. There's been some slight changes, I believe, but if you don't mind walking through that really quickly, just to give the viewers a little context. Started off as a probationary, and what the ranks were. At the time of officers, we still were working with lieutenants at the time. Is that correct, or was they captains from go when you went through the ranks?
No, when I went through the ranks, the lieutenant position was still available to us.
Right, right.
Um, that was something, it was a great learning position.
So
So if
junior
we go
captain, kind of what it was, right?
kind of, you had a lesser responsibility
Mhm,
and a more compact responsibility, if you will.
mhm, mhm,
So I think the rank structure in the suppression side of the department, which is where I started, was from a probationary firefighter, which is really you're just learning.
mhm.
You're an apprentice. and you're trying to learn your trade, and you're trying to learn it well, and actually you have to learn it quickly.
Oh
And
yeah.
so so
And there's a lot to learn.
and there is a lot to learn, and but then you're actually assigned to a more senior firefighter who sort of takes you under their wing and
Hmm.
teaches you. So then you become a firefighter, a fully fledged firefighter, and usually that's a big chunk of your career. And it
Hmm.
was for me. It was some 13 years as at that role before I became a pool officer. Well, and a pool officer is just someone who is trained to be an officer,
Hmm.
basically a manager, uh, but you're not fully confirmed into that role yet. And that was
Hmm.
a lieutenant's role. And at the time, the lieutenants would take care of our rescue trucks
Hmm.
and had a very specific role in terms of you're going to be responsible for all rescue
Hmm.
events. And
Hmm.
generally, you were the first in on every fire. But the good
Right.
part about that was we were first out of every fire too, and we we didn't have to do
Pros and
all the
cons.
cleanup. Yeah, we didn't have to do the cleanup. We would leave that to everyone else. So that was
I
good
think
fun.
I think there's something to add to that too, and just to give some context to sort of a day in the life of responsibilities of first responders, specifically in that role. Rescue truck you mentioned, I think a lot of stigma. We talked about Chicago Fire in our last episode a little bit about the BS that comes and goes with the smokeless fires and the 5 o'clock shadow being sexy and all these things that make good TV. But the reality is, a rescue truck apparatus officer and driver crew attend to, I would say, if I could have rough statistics, somewhere around the 80 percentile of medical incidences and sort of everyday miscellaneous style rescues, incidences, and not the sort of glamorous, kick the door in, fire, cat in the tree kite stuff that you might see. So a rescue truck is a very integral part of just the nuts and bolts of those sort of daily, tragic, of course, but also very harrowing experiences and rescues. So that's a very major part of what the department goes through in a very sort of integral way to gain repetitions and gain experience, but it can also be very harrowing as well. So, very important part of your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the part that's a real opportunity in that role is that you meet so many people and you
Hmm.
meet them at their sometimes at their worst days, and
Hmm.
sometimes you meet them at really fun but silly kind of events
Right,
as well.
right. Got themselves in a predicament. Yeah, no one's calling
Yeah,
911 if they're having their best day, right? Something's happening.
yeah, exactly.
It's not a
So
celebration.
after the lieutenant's position, I was fortunate. I became a captain, and a
Hmm.
captain is now in charge of not only a fire unit but also a
Hmm.
fire station. And so
Hmm.
you're in charge of all the equipment, the people, the actual
Hmm.
structure, and the
Hmm.
responsibilities all around that, which is
Hmm.
quite a large responsibility. Most of these structures are 15 to 20 million dollar structures. The
Right,
truck
right.
itself is over $1 million. And of course, that's just stuff. And now you're
Hmm.
in charge of 4 to 6
People,
people,
right.
and that's a much
Yeah,
greater and more important
right.
asset to everybody.
That's a
Um,
good
and,
point to
and
make. It's not just things and stuff. These are human beings with families, and responsibility weighs heavy. And that's probably a little bit why the beard took a turn for myself. But you're
yeah,
doing a good
yeah,
job of fighting the battle of the gray. Uh-huh.
yeah. The actual responsibility, I think, Kyle, as most people don't understand, is that uh, most days you're not making life and death sort of decisions. But when a fire event occurs and you're the first on the scene at a
Mhm.
fire call,
Mhm.
you are
Mhm.
literally making a decision to employ people into a fire, which
Mhm.
could kill them. And of course, we use all our training, all our skill, all
Mhm.
everything that's available to us, but you have to make that decision. It's go or no
Mhm.
go. And there's,
Mhm.
of course, we get trained about why and how we would go about that.
Mhm.
But at the end, it's a person making a decision, and you are
Mhm.
putting people's lives in danger for a reason. But
Mhm.
it's if you don't understand that, it's a really difficult place to be.
I chills when you say that, Tim. I literally remember, I'm speaking like an old cat here. It's not too far removed. My first experience as an officer at a fire scene with that exact situation. People can never to say they understand is an understatement of the year. But leisure moments, maybe out in the community doing a PR visit, maybe we're at the fire hall washing the truck or doing some chores and the tones go, and then this certainty is in front of you out of the blip of the air. And it's not all the time, and it's not necessarily even frequent, but when it happens, potentially one of the most, life altering decisions about to be made or not made. So I appreciate you making note of that. And it's not to bring, oh, poor them, poor me, but I think it really needs to be spoken to the awareness of what is potentially expected out of these individuals to make. And these are human beings. We've all come from work, we've all come from home, we've all come from some sort of influence in today's society that's affecting us all as individuals, but yet in the moment put in this pedestal, and it really needs to be brought into a little bit more of an awareness piece. I appreciate you going there with that.
Yeah, I think, Kyle, and this is one of the things that does impact first responders in a really significant fashion, is because certain people, certain types, A-type people
Mm-hmm.
tend to overthink these things and
Mm-hmm.
continuously think about it, which continuously impacts, and which is where some of the mindfulness practices really help, is to
Great
allow
point.
yourself to calm your mind for a period of time and not
Mm,
be in this cycle of worry and over analyzing and
great point.
putting yourself under stress where there is no stress yet,
Mm,
right? So you rely on you. This is why you take your training seriously, you take your
mm-hmm.
education seriously, and that allows you to calm your
Mm,
mind. And
great
but
point.
you have to give yourself time to do that.
It's a great point. Again, coming in from that grounded, confident space, not only physically, emotionally, but psychologically as well, by giving practices. And there's amazing training. I'll give Richmond Fire special credit. Not to be a bias, but the training was always top notch. We're given the professionals, we're given the best equipment. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to work in such an environment. But having said that, there's a personal application of these practices that I think we'll speak to as we develop into the program here. But personal obligation, there's only so much training that can be given to an employee while they're at work. What are they doing at home? What are they putting into their personal life? Which is what we'll sort of integrate as we speak here. But that's a great point. It's much more than we could imagine receiving at a workshop through the employer. There's responsibilities here for the individual to ingrain this into their personal life. And that's almost like the Jedi mind tricks. We learn so we don't have to we just react. It just happens. It's programmed. It becomes muscle memory. It's a default node. We've been taught to preserve our air in an emergency situation. We prefer to remain calm. But that all sounds great on paper. But when the proverbial shit hits the fan, how do we react? With those practices in place, we basically just let it default. So that's a great point. And for someone that's practiced, the career for over 35 years, and being here, Tim, being here not only in a physical space, you survived the career, which some of us, unfortunately, there's been some tragedies along the way, but also showing up in a sound psychological and physical manner as well, which shows the resolve and the implementation of these programs. So you're a walking, talking example. I'll give you some credit there ahead of time.
Thanks.
Wonderful, Tim. I wanted to get in maybe just briefly so we don't take up too much time. The nuance between the one thing I want to sort of decipher for yourself, you worked in a battalion chief position. And I believe me, so correct me if I'm wrong, deputy chief, then fire chief, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. And maybe just that sort of in your career specifically, roles and responsibilities, boots on the ground, battalion chief. And as we get up into the sort of pencil pusher position, no disrespect, we get up into the offices, off the suppression routine, how that kind of changed for you in your career.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Yeah, the last suppression type position I held, well, really, yeah, the actual suppression crew still in the Union was the battalion chief. And now battalion
Mm-hmm.
chief is in charge of all of the fire stations and all of the staff of one shift, which can
Shift.
be as over 50 people, which is
Mm-hmm.
larger than most fire departments in Canada.
Right.
So in Richmond, the battalion chiefs have a very significant role.
Mm-hmm.
So in that, there's all the organization, the everyday running of the stations and movement, which is administrative, but you still have a real linkage to the actual firefighting and rescue operations. Moving from that role now to a more strategic directive positions of deputy chief and fire chief, you change your focus and your focus now has to be longer range, where a battalion chief is looking at a day-to-day operation and maybe
Mm-hmm.
look a week out, perhaps a month
Fair.
out, and see what's going on, to now you need to have a 5, 10, 15
Right.
year perspective of where the department's going,
Right.
and how to get there in the most
Mm-hmm.
functional format. So it's a much
Mm-hmm.
more strategic role, and it is a significant change in your mindset in terms
Mm-hmm.
of of course, you're still ready and there to support the everyday situations, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to focus on a longer range so that the everyday can actually happen. If
Fair.
there's no forward looking, the everyday starts to become more and more muddled, and you
Great.
start to not have equipment. You don't have
Right.
turnout gear.
Budgeting.
Our
Right. 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 Yeah.
budgeting, you have to make sure that you're letting,
Yeah.
as a deputy, I was the deputy of operations, so which is all of the suppression roles. So you also have to look out and make sure that the training is going to fit the long-term plan.
Mm.
And does it need to change? What's changing in the world? For
Mm-hmm.
example, during my tenure, we saw EV cars coming in. And what
Right.
are all
Right.
the risks and the charging stations? What are all those things we're going to need to prepare for?
Right.
And we
Good
were
point.
fortunate enough to get ahead of it to a point where we created a relationship with Tesla, and they
Mm.
supplied us
I,
with a car to
I remember
train
that. Right. Right.
and training pieces of information. So we were the first ones in Canada to have that relationship.
Amazing.
But that's because we looked forward and we had a chief who would support that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was great. And we had a city who were supporting that kind of look.
Right.
So I think, but again, that role, deputy of operations, is centric on the department. And you have some linkages to the rest of the city. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Not that much. You're more still centrally focused. And then you move to the fire chief's role, which actually, of course, you need to be a long-term planner for all the roles within the department, not just the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
firefighting, but now you're also in charge of the
Right.
prevention, which is really is the mainstay of every fire department.
Right.
In
Right.
BC, in BC, the only role you have to have within a fire department is the prevention role. You don't
I
have to
see.
have suppression firefighters.
I see.
So, so it's way more important than people think,
Right.
and it's a very fascinating part of the department. And
It's not
then
the
the
part they make the
training.
TV shows about. That's all, right? Yeah, it doesn't get
That's right.
the notoriety on TV. But you're right. Think about this: if we prevent properly, we don't have to suppress. So,
That's right.
yeah,
And they're in charge of, should the building become engulfed in fire, will it actually, the building, will it actually operate in a fashion that we can rely on so that
right,
firefighters can go and
right,
put fires out?
sure.
So that,
Know the characteristics of said building, right? Yeah,
yeah, so now the fire chief is much more involved with the city and with the rest of the whole organization, in terms of, you have to go and compete for your budgets. You have to compete to be a central force in the department. You have to work with all the different departments. For example, streets. Oftentimes they'll get a complaint from a citizen. It's way too fast on our road, and without consultation, the street transportation people just put a whole bunch of speed bumps in.
right.
What's the fire chief doing talking about speed bumps? Well, we have a real interest because our response times slow down when we're going over speed bumps,
Right,
and our
exactly.
injuries go up. So even right down to that funny little example, it becomes a much bigger, more encompassing role. And so it's a fascinating role. You're really not as connected with the everyday suppression kind of work anymore. But from my point of view, as it was important for me still to not only communicate what's going on strategically with the department, with the city, but also to get out and actually have face-to-face conversations
Mm.
like we're doing right now as regularly as I could. It was put into my schedule and I did it.
Well, again, I think it speaks to the nuances and the layers that people just aren't aware of. And again, hats off to you, Tim. Always a very good job being progressive, forward thinking, and the subtleties of what someone a day in the life of would probably never think of. But it's a very great point. And it all bodes up to the end of the day when the shit hits the fan and the civilian population is saying, "What's taking the fire department so long? Well, my God, it's so easy to do this, so easy to do that." These are the details that people don't know. So I think it's really important that we sort of pull the wool back and understand that there's many layers to this. So thank you for spending. Now, briefly on that, I'll ask you, 25-year probably career in the suppression state roughly, and then into the last 5-10 years of your career wearing we'll call it the white shirts because there's some terminology here when we switch teams, Tim. If you had to kind of put, sort of cause and effect for most impact in your life, was it the early stages getting in the trenches or sitting upstairs trying to manage the puppets? I'm probably different in their own right, but if you kind of had to say what was tougher, what put more gray beers on the chin than the other?
I think for me, I think it became tougher. Well, there are different kinds of tough, of
I know,
course,
tough question.
um,
I know.
but they both have their difficult times, of course. But I think in terms of the suppression timing, the difficult times were more um, individuals who become impacted by
Hmm.
bad events, and
Right.
seeing that up close, that has a
Yeah.
real effect on you,
Friends and
and
colleagues.
especially
Yeah.
young people.
Hmm. Hmm.
Young people, babies. Those are
Yes.
difficult situations.
Of course.
Um,
Being impacted by the actual call. Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
and then I would say in terms of our own people,
Hmm.
firefighters, the most difficult time was where we as the city lost the contract with the um, airport, and we
Hmm.
were had to reduce by 42 people,
Right.
and those were families and
Sure.
a lot of anxiety, and that was a really difficult time in terms of
Hmm.
helping to move the department through that time and
Morale. Right.
make sure that people were taken care of, and it was a
Hmm.
really difficult time because a lot of those
Hmm.
people had recently just become firefighters, and now
Right.
they were under the specter of being laid
Yeah.
off. And
Tough. And a lot of subtleties that you've been a part of, as I say, throughout your career outside of regular sort of response, instances like this. So again, I really, you bring such an interesting perspective. So we'll leave it. We'll give the political answer there. A little bit of column A, little column B, and it's so hard to
yeah,
compare and put in a nutshell. But I appreciate your honesty there. Tim, could I ask you a little bit? If you could share with the viewers and the listeners now, you're proudly into your retirement stage. How many years you been retired now?
it's coming up to 3 years now in May.
It seems, since it seems like yesterday. I don't know about yourself. It's been a long
Yeah.
time, or has it been quickly? Yeah. And then sort of what your sort of situation is now. You're living the life, the retirement. Tell us a day in the life, sort of what that looks like for your retirement.
Well, my wife and I have done a lot of traveling in the
Good for
last
you.
while, and we've been able, like you, been able to see the wonderful country of Mexico and
Amazing.
enjoy that. We've also traveled to Europe and New Zealand most recently. So travel's
Amazing.
been a big part, and we're also able to, and fortunate enough to have a boat and get out in the Gulf Islands
Amazing.
in the summer for couple of months, which has been really nice as well.
Wow.
Um, while we're at home here in Steveston, just everyday life. I managed
Pretty
to,
nice.
yeah, it's pretty nice. I think we both managed to, prioritize keeping the house running,
Mm.
and our kids are close by. They're both in Vancouver here, so
Okay. How
that's
are your
nice.
kids
We
now,
see
Tim? You
them.
got two kids, do you?
Yeah, we got two adults. They're both 32
Oh
years old.
wow.
So
Wow.
So they're keeping busy, and we have one little 9-year-old granddaughter. So
Your
she's a
grandfather.
she's a pistol.
Congratulations. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
thanks. So she's
Awesome.
quite the character and keeps us hopping.
Yeah, our grandma
Um,
and grandpa are a regular, is that a daily, like, are you after school care or anything like that? I know I'm so jealous for people that have that in their life because I didn't, but I'm just curious.
yeah, no, we're not that yet. We that's not a big part of it yet, but we do weekends and things like that. And she comes
Right.
out with us on the boat for a
Awesome.
week or two each year.
Oh,
So
amazing. Well,
that's nice. But
congratulations having that ability to have that integrated relationship. But and that speaks
yeah.
one more, Tim, to the self. Not that you're an old timer by any means, but keeping yourself vital and ready. And kids can, grandkids especially, there's a lot of demand physically, mentally, all of it. So to keep yourself in a good vital position for the game of life is what I say. Never mind showing up to
Yeah.
the gym, but why do we do this? For that exact example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just to be able to
Yeah.
get out and throw a ball or,
Yeah.
kick a ball
Yeah.
around, just do those fun little
Sure.
things and
Amazing.
not be in bed for the next 2 weeks.
Right, or sick and not being able to get out and play, and that's why I speak to a
Yeah.
lot of people on that space. We pay now or pay later, meaning invest in our health now to prevent the lapse of time down the road that we so near dearly. And Tim, you're a perfect example. We've been, I don't want to say sold this line of BS, but it's like you go to school, get the job, get the career, live the life, and then all in the golden carrot, waiting for retirement to go enjoy it. And how many people? Yourself, I'm sure, could speak to many either don't make it that far and unfortunately some sort of tragedy, some health diagnosis, or even a mental health issue where they're just not in a place to enjoy. So, you work your entire life, 35 years, to go enjoy that golden year, and sometimes we don't even get there. So for myself, it's an area of a lot of frustration when we have people that are literally choosing, it's a choice, everything in life is a choice, to not prioritize their health and wellness. And I'm going to sound like a broken record over and over, and I know you share the same sentiment, but man, and man, I just want to shake people, and hopefully they can sort of wake up to the importance of implementing just some basic practices early in their life, foundational layer for the rest of their structure going forward.
Yeah, I think I really agree with that, Kyle. I know for myself during my career, as I became more and more busy, with the administrative roles,
Hmm.
there's not that time like a suppression firefighter who can
Of
take an
course.
hour out of their day and go work
Sure.
out. So I would
Sure.
prioritize that by coming in an extra
That's the
early
word. Prioritize,
and
Tim. That's the word. Good for you.
yeah, and so and then I would look to, people within the department who have specific skills to help me, like what
Hmm. Hmm.
set up some workouts for me, set up some
Sure.
different ideas.
Sure.
And what struck me and what was really fortunate, and this is a fortunate part of being a deputy administrative chief, was I was fit, but I was always hurt.
Mm.
And so what was that about? And I was trying to
Hmm.
figure that out. And so we
Interesting.
brought in specialists. And what the
Yep.
specialists found was that most of the our people worked really hard to stay fit,
Hmm.
but they weren't doing it correctly.
Mm.
And so what we did was when we found this out, what we did was implement a program where all
Hmm.
our new staff, when they came in,
Hmm.
would have a certain part of every day at the
Hmm.
Olympic Oval in Richmond, where we
Yeah.
would take experts and they would teach them how to work out properly, how to do mindful practices, how to
Yoga. I
actually
loved it. Yeah. You're
how to
great, son.
actually incorporate active rest, right?
What
So
is this
which
concept? Right. Right. Yeah. More
which
must be
almost
better, right?
nobody did, right? Like at the
Nobody.
time,
Nobody.
no one did this active resting
Right.
kind
Right.
of concept. They just kept
Hmm.
working harder and harder and harder, which led to
Toxicity,
injuries.
cortisol, depletion, all of it. Push the red line further, have a coffee, and go again. And I was walking, talking proof of that, Tim. So I do appreciate your note to that. And again, showing once more a progressive fire chief at the helm to understand we can prevent injury by doing a little bit of foreshadowing, preventative work here in
Yeah.
that space. So once again, well done.
Well, what struck me, Kyle, was we would change the oil in our car, right? We would get a tune up in our car, but but why aren't we? actually tuning our engine of our
I
car, which is the people are the engine of the fire department. Why aren't we tuning them up, giving them the opportunity to be their best?
I've got a giant smile on my face because it's verbatim what I would say to my clients and friends and family. The analogy is always to a car. You know, you put the top fuel in, you put the synthetic oil in, you polish the thing on the weekend, you put a tarp over it in the driveway. But when it comes to our health and wellness, we're drinking Coca-Cola, smoking cigarettes, and eating Doritos on the couch and wondering why we don't feel good in today's world. It's just like, really? So I appreciate the car
Yeah,
analogy because I say we're all Ferraris or Porsches or whatever collector car of your dream. Treat it with the same essence that you would do for this collector that we hold so near and dear. We only get one of these, right? Why don't we cherish it?
absolutely.
So again, probably a whole other episode there on longevity and healthcare, but I'll try to check a few
Yeah.
boxes as we go. But I appreciate that, Tim, how you integrated it through not only your career as an active firefighter, but as an administrative role to make sure others benefited from your own sort of perspective as well. Um, Biggest change in today's fire, I know you've been out for a few years, but what you noticed, in 2023 to 2025 or the last 2 or 3 years back to 86, if you had to kind of surmise it, I know that's maybe a loaded question of a long answer, but if you could kind of see, in a few sentences, what you notice is the biggest change, maybe not only for the responsibility of a firefighter, but what they're sort of succumb to as far as the call of duty, maybe has that changed in your perspective?
Well, if we start with that sort of call for duty perspective, I think the biggest change is in attitudes,
Mm,
and in the style of training. The attitude and the
okay.
style of training has led to a change in attitudes. And I'm not saying firefighters have bad attitudes, because they don't. They have great attitudes. But in terms of the training, has so focused on structure of
Hmm.
how to actually fight a fire and do
Hmm.
things, that it's almost this paralysis by analysis. They have to overanalyze everything. And as the analysis goes, the fire grows. And so
Yeah.
they analyze more, and the fire grows more. And it gets, the bigger the fire gets, the more dangerous it is.
Mm,
So I know the perspective when I first started, it wasn't correct. We were overly aggressive,
right.
but but
Cowboys.
we
Yeah.
cowboys, and we weren't well trained. So so that was a dangerous combination.
Hmm.
But on the good side is we were so aggressive, we kicked the door in, and we go for the firefight and put the fire out when it was very small.
Hmm.
So in that case, it's less dangerous.
Right.
So there's somewhere in the middle there where I think our current firefighter groups need to be more aggressive,
Hmm.
using their great training.
Hmm.
Now that's a huge change. So it's less, I would say our firefighters currently are less aggressive in terms of fighting fires.
Hmm.
In terms of understanding of people's needs, I think the biggest change has been around mental health
Hmm.
and the impacts of the role on people's mental health. And I was fortunate, and I think this really helped me through my career. I was one of the fortunate ones in our department to get involved in the critical incident stress debriefing teams. And
Hmm.
I've got involved when I was, oh, I think I was a 3-year firefighter. So I had this training, and it was a really great training on how to help others. But of
Hmm.
course, if you know how to help others, you know how to help yourself.
I was gonna say you number one, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, and it's much like the idea on an airplane, they
Mm.
tell
Put
you
your mask
to
on
put your
first,
own
right?
air mask on before you help somebody else. And so,
Right.
with that thought process, um, I was able to take care of myself through my career. But I was fortunate in terms of there was this training available, but I
Hmm.
stepped forward to take it as well. And
Right.
that helped
Yeah.
me. But I think with this understanding of mental health, and this is what you and I were talking about, this man up idea. At that time, early in my career, the man up thing was just suck it up, shut up. have a
Right.
beer, or have a bottle of booze, and away you go. You'll
Sure.
be fine.
Sure. Right. Suppress
Basically,
it. Yeah.
stuff everything down. And
Right.
and that's had an effect. A lot of the longtime retired firefighters are struggling with mental health
Hmm.
issues now
Hmm.
because they
Hmm.
did stuff it all down. Now it's emerging and they don't understand it. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of issues around that, around
Hmm.
stuffing down your feelings, not letting them, uh, understanding
Pro-
them for yourself.
yeah. Processing. Right. Yeah. Integration. Of course. It's this is science meets esoteric practice, but it's right in the middle of founded factual studies that we have to recognize, and that's appreciate you bringing that to the Man
Mhm.
Up Method, because that's kind of what's brought us here to today, to understand the ways it was being done, what's been happening, and ways we can kind of change course along the way. And what better way to have people that have actually experienced this, lived it, breathed it, both sides of the coin, to potentially have some involvement as to what this curriculum could look like. So, again, great
Yeah,
great point.
I think the important part is this change in the idea around man up from
Hmm.
the stuff it down, man up, to step forward to ask for help. And
Amen.
that's manning up.
Amen.
Just step forward and ask for help. Step forward and share your experience and talk about it at the kitchen table, for example, or with your spouse or with your
Even amongst your crews, I
anybody.
remember I was very active amongst my crew, and a lot of I can remember they're looking at me like, "Who is this guy? What's he talking about feelings? How did that make you?" I'll be the first one to lead by example, to not make it weird. The captain starts talking about something, you're going to obviously follow suit, but making sure I normalize that type of speak and normalize the sensitivity. And it takes a little bit of sort of courage and a little bit of against the grain mentality, because in our male society, Tim, and you've got a few years elder to speak to this, generationally, it just didn't what you didn't do that. That was sissy stuff. That was, you're a pansy if
Yeah.
your boys don't cry. My son, the early years of raising him, and he'd fall on the playground, I'd jump him up real quick, and, oh, we're good, right, walk it off. Realizing now with Mr. Uh, Gabor Mate, who speaks to the ADHD and the child-related traumas. In essence, we're not allowing these people to feel safe and feel their feelings, and therefore, at 45 years old, they've got a whole plethora of long-going terms, just because we're passing on this generational bullshit of men don't cry, men can't be sensitive. We can do both. We're big, strong, able
Mhm.
creatures, but we have to have an existence between our divine feminine and divine masculine. I'll just go one further. A true recommendation, in my humble opinion, of true masculine strength and power and resilience is the balance between divine feminine energy, where we can express ourselves, say what needs to be said, share, be open-minded, and then soldier on in a strong context. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I don't like the visual of the take a knee
yeah,
idea
yeah, yeah.
because it doesn't make you, it just stops and you're not doing anything to help yourself.
Right, right.
Now you can step back from a difficult situation, but as you step
Hmm.
back, you need to step forward to help,
I like that.
to
Pause for
discuss,
reflection. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
to do something to help yourself get better, and
Hmm.
to become, perhaps you become even better than you ever were before, right? Like it's
Strong.
a change. You may change, but change isn't a bad thing. Change is how the world has evolved to what it is now, right? So
Change
it's,
takes such courage, Tim, and I'm sort of walking this walk as we speak. Not to put, look at me by any means, but it takes such courage to push away from what we know as the conventional, comfortable, familiar path. Whether it's right or wrong, we know where this goes. We know what to do, so we'll just do it. It takes a lot of courage and bravery to maybe just say, "Hey, what's down this road?" So
yeah.
whatever the catalyst to spark that curiosity, whatever it is, regardless, it takes a lot of courage. Action is key, and action creates change. Awareness
Well,
is key.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's especially important for first responders because it's an identity thing.
Mm.
Most first responders are become part of that their
Oh,
structures because they like to
truly
step
are.
forward to help.
Right.
So
It's
if
in
they
us.
step back, take a knee, don't do anything to help, they lose their identity
Mm.
of who they think they are, which
Right.
compounds whatever their mental health injury is,
Right.
instead
Right.
of instead of starting to get better. So starting to get better looks like stepping forward, get help,
Mm-hmm.
and now you are who you think you are, right? I'm a person of action. I'm taking action. I'm okay. I'm
Right.
still the person I think I am.
Mm.
And it's really important.
Great point. These are such subtle, nuanced pieces of this. It's an onion for layers and layers, decades, and
Absolutely.
so many discussions to have. And I appreciate the sort of in-depth perspective. Um, so biggest change today, attitude. I think that's a great point. And again, it's probably not something that we'd sort of come to naturally without having to sort of step back and look at it at a bigger scale. The next follow-up question was better for worse, but that's not really a metric to measure because there's so many different variables to measure that. We'll just leave it at that for now. Um, Moving on, if there want to, and I don't sort of take it to the mud here, Tim, but I know for myself, I've shared with some of our viewers and listeners some instances that had great impact for myself. If you would kind of, maybe take a step down memory lane and focus on, again, not details, but something that you really sort of held in your career that was just a moment of, it unfortunately can be a moment of tragedy or something that you experienced, but really that left a mark that either caused new direction for you going forward, caused new awareness, or implemented maybe a bit of a seed that you might have noticed, caused a bit of a change going forward. And I'll just put in perspective for you, a call perspective for me, where I basically noticed that I had become a little hardened, a little bit tainted from that position on. And going forward, looking back, that sort of 10-year tenure where that had come before I sort of caused course correct for it, wow, that did really have an impact in my life that I didn't really notice because you're in it. So if there's a moment maybe in your 35 career that probably many to speak of, if we could kind of zero in on that one fateful day where this happened, and from then on I noticed this was sort of a cause and effect.
Yeah, Cal, I think fairly early on in my career, I was a part of a crew who responded to a fatal car accident. And the mother of a small child had passed away. And I was assigned to take care of the baby who was in
Mm,
the car seat in the back.
mm,
And the baby had blasts all through facial features and upper body. And I was tasked to take care of that while the mother was dead in front of the car.
mm-hmm,
So we're side by side, if you will.
mm, mm-hmm,
And so what happened really was that's while you're in that mode, you're focused, you're dealing with the patient who was this baby, and that was all fine. And it's when you turn around and get back to the station and start thinking about it, and this
mm-hmm.
is before we had critical incident brief
Right.
debriefings. So I was left with these feelings for myself, right? Like, what is the poor baby, going to grow up without a mom, going to,
Right.
all of these things that you naturally think about.
Mm-hmm,
Um, of course, you worry about the family of the young mother and all of that, but which actually only allows you to deflect your own feelings because
mm-hmm.
you're translating it all to them, right? Like, oh, they're so bad, but actually, what's happening to yourself?
To mirror.
And so the change there for me was when I started to look around, like and discuss with a few of the really senior guys with uh, what can we do, right? What
Mm-hmm,
can I be involved with? And that's where I became involved with the critical incident stress team, excuse me,
mm-hmm,
and allow myself to get this training. And through the
mm-hmm,
training, obviously there was all this kind of past traumas uh, held within all of the members of the team. And
mm-hmm,
so the training was actually debriefing and diffusing each other.
mm-hmm,
And what do
mm-hmm.
these things mean? How do you talk through them? How do you,
Right.
actually allow these feelings to move through you and not stay with you? And
Mm-hmm,
so it was a real moment where, yeah, this could have stuck with me forever. And I mean,
mm-hmm. Of
it is a memory I hold, and I don't, it's not,
course.
so many calls you don't have a clear memory of,
Right. You
right?
kind of
So
packed them down into they're on the hard drive somewhere, but they're,
they're somewhere
hidden.
there, but they really have no
Yeah.
impact, right? Like they just pass through you, and it's just another one.
Mhm.
but this one had an impact. It
Mhm.
moved me towards this, and further into my career, I was always focused, and especially as an administrative chief,
Mhm.
where I
Mhm.
had the opportunity to implement programs.
Mhm.
Then it gave me the opportunity to remember that feeling
Mhm.
and try and come up with programs that would help people
Others,
even
yeah,
more so.
going for it. Well, I first off, thanks for sharing, Tim. I know, personally how, I wouldn't say it's not difficult, and you might be like, it's no big deal. And I know that's a default that we all do, people that sort of wear this life of service, but it is a big deal, and it really deserves, you know, not notoriety or accolades, but just an awareness and a validation. You said it just briefly, and again, I'm just a little bit more aware of verbiage now today in this position I'm in. It's just another call. The ones that don't have impact. I might just disagree with you, Tim, and I don't mean this in a disrespect, but they do impact us. We just don't really realize, I don't mean that they're not,
Mhm.
consequential and causing course, but the accumulation of said trauma does impact us, but we've normalized being fortified and normalized being resilient. So I know what you're saying, but I just wanted
Mhm.
for the viewers out there, yeah, it's just another one. But that other one was a horrific dismemberment, disembowelment, a tragedy of some such. So again, just
Yeah.
really speaks to the consistency of what these men and women around the globe are succumbing to in a daily shift. And I do appreciate you getting vulnerable there and speaking to so much, which of course is
Yeah.
a but I do also really admire the course correct that it did cause, even through a sort of a tragedy, of course, a negative experience caused you to become immersed and aware in the critical incident distress debriefing program, potentially becoming sort of a pioneer in that position and implementing it in the department. So through the negative, we built some positive out the other side. So hats off to you there. Instead of just allowing it to be a dark spot, we sort of made lemonade out of lemons, if you will. Um,
I do
just
agree, Kyle, that I think what we miss as first responders is that our normal stress level is very high,
yeah, right.
and we start to not recognize that
Mhm.
high stress level
Mhm.
that you live with
Right.
all the time.
Mhm.
And it that I'm not saying it's higher than some other industries,
Oh,
because I don't know that, but
fair.
what I do know is our stress level remains high at all times, and those do have physical impacts on you as well as mental
Somatically,
impacts.
physically, mentally, we idle at around 99%. So I understand.
Right.
Yeah, a calm day at the fire hall can be basically a marathon heart rate for most. But
Sure.
yeah, I agree, and it's a very nuanced, it's such a specific area that it just needs to be sort of explained a little bit. I just want to just align a little bit. It's interesting, but I of course completely understandable. Uh, Probably the most impactful incident in my career and did involve an infant as well. And of course, that's being men. We're supposed to be big, burly, strong men. But anytime you involve, I don't know if it's a dog, cat, mouse, man, woman, baby, we're still impactful when they have a loss of life. But for some reason, good reason, there's an infant involved, it really is impactful. And at the time, my situation, I was not a father at the time, but sort of new into that stage of my life. And I think from that day forward, every time I would see a family or see a mother-child relationship, it really struck a different chord. And I'm sure for yourself too. You're now in the grocery store on your days off, seeing a baby in a stroller with their mother, and just wondering what that relationship would or wouldn't be with the mom involved in the life. So there's so many layers to it. Once again, and I think on a special note too, you made mention to you're in the car in the moment, and you said you just kind of, I don't know what your exact words, but it's like no big thing. We just go to work, we do our thing. We become robots essentially. And I remember, the blinders are on, and we just go to work because we're trained to do that. But when you step back and you realize, for me, it was the impact of seeing the father come home, to see the neighbor come across the street, to see the story start to tell of what happened, and you see that ripple effect of the impact that we've completely been desensitized to. And that, for me as a human, was probably one of the most difficult things. In the moment, bloods and guts and all the things and the stuff, it's just like we're doing our thing. We're trained to do so. But when you kind of take the larger lens and see what's actually happening outside of that, a moment, it's a powerful impact. So thank you for sharing that, Tim, and a lot of similarities for myself there as well. And
I
I know
think,
in
Kyle, one of
35
the
years,
things, yeah, I
yeah, sure,
think
go
one of
ahead.
the things people struggle with, in those times is the helplessness of you see yourself as someone who can make change and make things better, but there's
Hmm.
times where you can't make things better. Things
No,
aren't getting
no.
better.
Right.
And this feeling of helplessness, I
Hmm.
think is, especially you and I were talking about it in
Hmm.
conjunction with the LA firefight right now.
Great point.
The overwhelming nature of this is going to have a real mental impact on a lot of the firefighters and first responders
Hmm.
and people in general
Hmm.
feeling helpless to make change. It really has this really terrible effect on people. And I think there's going to be a need for a lot of help in terms
Mm.
of mental health injuries from this fire, where people are really going to need a lot of help to get past this helplessness.
Hmm.
And it oftentimes, my way of talking through it with people was that, yet for you being there and
Hmm.
doing whatever you could, they would have
Hmm.
no chance.
Right.
So
Right.
you're, even though you
That's
don't
a great point.
see a massive
Yeah,
effect,
your impact. Yeah. You being
you
there is a
have
big
an
impact.
impact. You do
Mm.
have an impact. You do have to, and this is where the good side of the ego comes.
Mm.
You did have an impact. You were valuable. You
Hmm.
are enough just
Hmm.
as you are. And those kind of feelings have to be translated to people. I mean, it's easy to say, it's not easy to feel, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But the more people say it and actually believe it to each
Mm.
other, the more it comes to fruition.
Couldn't agree more. The intention is set, the consciousness is raised, the frequency is raised. I know we're taking a little bit esoteric there in the spiritual space, but this is all in today's world. This is science. This is factual. We understand what happens here. We can literally create in our daily life. So more people that embody that mindset, it literally does change the course of frequency. And showing up, being just in service and in attention is more than most people understand. Has a great impact. So that's a great point. And thank you for bringing notice to these, obviously the tragedy that's happening in California right now in the LA fires. And I don't want to sound a little bit, controversial here, but it's almost, once Hollywood is affected, all of a sudden now where eyes are open, and unfortunately sometimes it takes big instance, whether it's some sort of tragedy, for us to become a little bit more aware and maybe now act in a preventative state as opposed to a reactive state. And I know you spoke earlier about the importance of prevention in a fire department is actually number one as far as the priority. So now when we talk about Governor Newsom, we won't get into the political side of things, all the cutbacks that were made to save a few pennies were really the show of what happens when the preventative measures were pulled back, and now we're experiencing a reactive measure as opposed to preventative. And I know as a fire chief and city council and you speak to that in a whole other space as well, because I know there's a lot of bureaucracy and there's both sides to this coin, don't get me wrong. But that's a great example of what happens when we kind of play it a little bit thin, not look at the big picture.
Well, I think, Kyle, the playing thin part in terms of the response teams obviously does have an effect. I think where we miss the boat mostly is in the prevention area.
Hmm.
For example, if all new structures had to have a steel roof,
Hmm.
if the fire smart programs were mandatory,
Hmm.
uh, these preventative measures,
Hmm.
they don't stop
They lessen. Yeah.
wildfires, but
Yeah.
they minimize them. They allow the
Absolutely.
firefighters to use what resources they have to put them out.
Right.
LA is making, or the news is making a big deal about fire hydrants, and there
Yeah.
wasn't enough
Yeah.
fire
Yeah.
water.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just have a quick think about the wildfires in the middle of province of BC.
Right. There is no water.
You wouldn't find a fire hydrant for 5 miles, let
It's a
alone
great point, Tim.
500 feet. And so there's never, once a fire becomes that big, there's never going to be enough water. There just
Great
isn't.
point.
So the reality is you have to focus on prevention. And
Mm.
prevention looks like building codes,
Mm.
things we don't think about, right? They think about fire smart programs,
Mhm.
which the province of BC has, but they're not mandatory.
Mm.
And so little things like people will put there in the wilderness, they'll put 2 or 3 cords of wood up beside their house because that's where it dries and it gets better. Well, guess what? That's what also catches fire.
Box of matches under your house. Can I share a vulnerable space there, Tim? We have a small cottage up in the Coquihalla, wooded,
Yeah.
very rural area. Uh, Sweeping fires, as you know more, better than most, through those Kelowna fires a decade ago, and in the last few years, BC's been known for our summer fire season. The forestry came through and take some pictures and put some billboards on people's cabins of sort of what not to do. Our cabin was the one of what not to do. We literally store all our firewood under the cabin, which is a box of
Yeah.
matches under our wood tindered cabin. Needless to say, we left, right. So we had to make a few changes there. But as soon as you said that, I was like, oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are, it sounds simple. It's not simple. It's not. It might be easy. It's just not simple.
Yeah,
You
fair.
can look forward to
That's a
those
good point.
ideas,
Mm.
but to encourage people to think
Yeah,
about it. So
right.
as places like Lytton
Hmm.
and now LA and
Hmm.
Jasper rebuild, they need
Hmm.
to rebuild with these building codes that stop
Right,
fires.
right. Great point.
Let's not have,
What?
like you're in the middle of a forest or a wildland area like LA and
Hmm.
you've got a
Hmm.
wooden roof. Well, guess
Hmm.
what?
Hmm.
Your house is going to catch on fire. Right? Like, so
Newsflash. Yeah, right, right.
yeah, you know what? It was always funny, Kyle, because people thought I was making fun, but I would always talk about like you remember the kid's story, the three pigs,
Yeah, yeah,
and the big bad wolf's coming to pull your house down. Well, the one made out of straw, that one, right?
yeah.
It's the same
Right,
idea with
right,
fires. The big
right,
bad wolf is the fire coming. And if your house is
right.
made of straw, guess what? It's going down. If it's made out of concrete,
Yeah.
right? How far is
Bought
it
yourself
going?
some time. Sure.
So
Great
in
point.
that
And
way, could you not enforce the rule to have, the hardy plank as your siding? It
of
looks
course,
like wood, right? But
of
it's
course.
concrete, it's not catching fire. So
Well,
there's these kind of, and a steel roof. Right? You've
right.
got concrete siding with a steel roof. Is that building going to be there longer than a wood frame, a straw one? It's the three pigs, right? If you want
Well,
a
and
straw house, guess what? It's going to be gone.
I think it speaks to not only your tenure sitting through these ranks to be awareness in that space, but also, Tim, in today's world, we building costs and bottom dollar. Okay, it's cheaper to use X, Y, and Z materials, but then look at the billions of dollars of restructuring to build these cities back. Spend a little bit more now to prevent later. But again, digress.
And I,
That's quite using logic and common sense.
yeah. Well, I think this is where the insurance industry can be real leaders and say, look, we're not insuring your
Right,
house
right.
as you build it. We're not insuring your house if it's built like out of
Fair.
straw,
Yeah.
basically. Right?
It's a all in kind of environment as far as, policies being held at certain standards. Otherwise, why would people incentivize going this way if it was I
Absolutely.
can build my house for thirds over here, you had to pay X, but if it's not
Yeah.
incentivized, there needs to be so it's a systemized approach. But I appreciate those
You
insights.
you have to have a systems approach to it.
Mhm. Mhm. Awesome. Well, let's take a bit of a shift gears here, Tim. Sort of part and parcel. I will speak again, advocation for sort of speaking to you, implementing some health and wellness practices early throughout your career, whether with some on-the-job influences or, collectively in the department, 250 odd suppression firefighters, there's a cast of thousands, in today's space. I'm so fortunate to be able to rub elbows with literal NHL retirees that are now being employed in the department space. So what an amazing opportunity to meet, athletic minds, people in health and nutrition, counseling, somatic therapies, everything under the sun that's embodied into a department, what resources are available for yourself implementing throughout your career. But now post-retirement, you've mentioned, you can share a little bit, you play masters in field hockey, you're also still involved in the rugby scene. Having these implementations of the sort of health practices, but also implementing sort of the mind and spirit element as well, noticing how that's translating now into your retire years as you continue your athletic career.
I think, Kyle, having a base, like anything, having a base of knowledge and structure to your life, it's almost like having a job in and of
Hmm.
itself. Taking
Of
care
course.
of your body and yourself is a job aside of your real job,
It should
and
be. Yep.
it should be. And it was something that I was fortunate in terms of being able to play on highly, competitive teams my whole life.
Hmm.
And so I had a structure for from when I was very young, really. From In
Hmm.
fact, I started playing on provincial traveling teams when I was like 10 years old.
Hmm.
So it's been a while. And of
Mm.
course,
It's part of your
everything
lifestyle, I'd
changes.
argue, though, Tim. Would you speak to that? Maybe just it's been part of your life.
Yeah,
It's not something you turned on
it,
and off. It's who you were. It's a part of your life.
that's right. And while you're fortunate, you make your own fortune
Mm.
by
I like
creating
that.
these sort of practices that are important and you're consistent. I think consistency is what's the most important part.
Hmm.
And I think, Kylie, I to share, like, yes, I had all of these practices and I would do them, and I didn't eat poorly. I didn't, but I came to, 61 years old, and I ended up with a heart attack and had triple bypass surgery.
Right.
So it can happen to you, even though you do everything right. But I think what's important about that was that my recovery from that, first of all, I
Mm.
survived it, right? I survived it without any injury to my heart.
Right.
And I was able to, even though I had in one of the arteries 100% blockage,
Wow.
right? So I was able to survive it, but I was also able to recover from it really quickly.
Mm.
Like I was all because of all these practices,
Hmm.
because we were doing some of the silver fit stuff, we were doing
Hmm.
some of
Yeah.
these concepts already.
Right.
I was able to focus on my recovery, but my body was ready to recover.
Yeah. You had a
It,
good foundation.
you have this great
Yeah.
foundation. The
Hmm.
consistency creates that foundation.
Right. Right.
Your body's ready to, and it's able to reconnect itself. It's
Muscle
able
memory.
to,
Right. Right.
and I was able to, because my mind was in the right place as well.
Mm.
I wasn't feeling sorry for myself. Oh, how come it happened to me? Like
Right.
all the
Victim
woe is me
mindset.
stuff. It was more,
Hmm.
no, it has happened to me. I'm not special.
Mm.
And you know what? Let's get, as you say, let's man up.
Let's man
Let's
up.
use
Right.
all of these different components to make myself better. No one's going to make me better. I
Mm.
have to make myself better.
Good for you.
And I have to look for the right way to do that. And
Well, it's
while
a
I already
remarkable
had
story, Tim.
practice,
Mm.
I already had practices,
Right.
but then I had to improve upon those practices as well.
As
And
we mature in today's world and resource of technology and
yeah,
education, of course, these adapt as you go. But bottom line is, you had some installation and some lifestyle approach already there, which bodes to the recovery. That arguably a less tenure of this, setback that you incurred. Granted,
yeah,
a major and a remarkable story. I wouldn't say I forgot Tim, but it was definitely sort of in the back 40. But I
yeah,
appreciate bringing that up. If I could just interject for a moment, I think I would love you to speak maybe an awareness piece now that having doing the things, eating the green smoothies, having an exercise practice, but still suffering a fairly traumatic major life, obviously a health incident. Could we touch on slightly maybe the realization of how much sort of a psychological, emotional impact that a stressful career could potentially reside in form of a physical ailment? And I don't, want to take you down anywhere if you don't feel there's a relationship there, but we know stress is a killer. And working, 35 years as a fire chief, not only through suppression, but the administrative role, being a father, being a husband, having today's world and stress on you, sometimes it doesn't look what it looks like as far as what stress can compile as. Maybe we could speak to the physical impact a little bit.
yeah. I think we were talking a bit about that earlier, Kyle. It's your level of normal stress is
Right.
very high as an administrative fire chief and
Mhm.
persons
Mhm.
who work through the suppression end. Even every time the fire bell goes off, you get this
Mhm.
shot of cortisol, which has a physical effect on you.
Mhm.
And even that we changed from when I started the when the
The,
bells
the,
went off, it was
I spoke on that last week. Now it's a digital tone, and these are psychologically made to
yeah,
have less effect. But it is, I'm like Pavlov's dog when I hear a similar tone. pee
That's
myself a
right.
little bit.
It still has an, even though it's less, it still has an effect.
Of course it does.
So
Yes.
I think this normal level of stress, and earlier in my career, I didn't take any time to
Hmm.
not that I'm great at meditation or anything like that, but I take
Yeah.
time to be more quiet space, right?
Hmm.
And some
Hmm.
people will call that meditation, and some people will call it whatever they want to call it, right? But I think that would have been helpful through
Sure.
to know how to do that well,
Hmm.
and to have a good practice of that.
Hmm.
Of course, that doesn't stop your genetics, right? Your
No, but
genetics
it's
are
a
your
piece of the
genetics.
puzzle.
It's all a piece of the puzzle, and
Hmm.
trying to allay some of those stresses through mindful practices
Hmm.
certainly can be
Hmm.
helpful. And I can see now where being better at that throughout my career would have been a benefit.
Sure.
But who knows?
Hindsight's always 20/20, right? Yeah. It.
Absolutely. So it's having a wider foundation. I had a
Mm.
foundation, but sometimes the foundation isn't quite wide enough to support
Hey,
the top of the peak.
should we look no further than they used to tell smoking wasn't bad for you, Tim? I mean, we all the
Right.
education is evolving as we go, so we do the best we can given the resources we have. But a perfect example, great foundation of health and living, but we're still susceptible for the stresses of life. And I think you said it best, Tim. Whether it's the fire tones going, it's the sleep deprivation through a night shift, it's the exposure to chemicals and diesel fumes. It's accumulation of a healthy lifestyle. It doesn't necessarily give you a ticket, clear sailing, but it's really important to now, if we look back, how do we install some of the more nuanced applications of health and wellness in the form of breath work, in the form of meditation? I use sauna therapy, I use cold therapy, I use red light therapy, we use lymphatic drainage, PMF mats, the biohacking list goes on and on. Firefighters are treated as jack of all trades, master of none. When the duty calls, we're supposed to do everything. Why not adopt the same analogy when it comes to our healing and our health and wellness? We need a little bit of each. And people like yourself, Tim, at the helm of these progressive fire departments, now advocating for, some of the departments now have saunas built in as far as their rehabs. I think that's amazing. A top-notch training facilities. We have nutritionists, educationists coming in. I'll speak one further. For example, in today's pop culture world, we know this gentleman, Jake Paul, who's got way too famous for all the wrong reasons. But for example, in his team, and most sports teams now have a breathwork facilitator that come on in and do some sort of mindful work. This is no longer the esoteric woo-woo. This is absolute science applications of the physical body and the relationship between somatic and parasympathetic nervous system. And this is something that's very near and dear to myself, not only being I don't want to say a victim, but something that succumbed to some of the trials and tribulations of a trauma-induced career and starting to feel some physical symptoms. I'm very grateful that I didn't have a cardiac event yet, not that it's on my horizon. But these are some of the examples. For myself, I started experiencing what I now know is some anxiety attack and sort of some paralysis, physical symptoms that were very, very alarming and very dangerous for myself at the time. And how they can manifest and show up in your life is really unknown until it happens. But utilizing these programs and processes along our way, I think really builds not only resilience, but put the car up, like you said, on the hoist, change the oil, make sure the filters are changed, and keep some good maintenance going forward. So speaks one more to a full sort of encompassed health and wellness lifestyle approach, not just these single modalities that we throw at it here and there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is really having a great foundation allows you, if something happens, then
Right,
you're ready to recover from
right,
it in a much better way.
right. Either prevent it or potentially offer a much quicker resolve and recovery. So that's a great point.
Yeah.
Um, just a few notes here I want to go to, Tim. Obviously, there's no issue there as far as prioritizing a health and wellness lifestyle. Um, Maybe how you see, potentially departments sort of integrating this. I know there's some political aspects as how far we can go, being at the helm and being all the way through the stages in today's active departments, with the union sort of infrastructure woven in there too. You kind of have this sort of nuanced balance of what can be implemented and offered to the employer or to the employee into the department. But I think it brings back full circle to the onus on the individual to implement this stuff into their personal lives. There's only so much a department and an employer can offer, And myself, I took a lot of pride coming to the table as a candidate, trying to get the job as a suppression firefighter, to come to the table and the best version of myself, not only physically, but to my level of education, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and physically as well. I think we spoke to it a little bit, but there's a balance between what the employer can provide and what the person's responsibility is. I think in today's culture, we get, and you've probably noticed this too, with the recruit firefighters coming up to the table, maybe not in the career path that, you grew up as a young man wanting to be a firefighter. This was a dream of mine. I've worked for the last 10 years of my life to get there. Now it's a lot of people like, I don't know, I'll give it a shot. Sounds kind of interesting. And they come forward and they throw their hat in the ring and they get hired day one. You get the recruit firefighter, the millennial coming through going, hey, nobody told me. Nobody told me I was supposed to do that. Probably frustrating from a fire chief standpoint to kind of have this lack of ownership. But going forward with the new type of candidate out there, the new type of millennial firefighter coming to the table, how you would measure sort of coming to the table with your own resolve, or do you think it falls on an employer to kind of emphasize the ownership on the individual? I took a lot of pride showing up to be the best version of myself on my own. And if there was extras being offered to the department, wonderful. But I'm not going to show up as an expectation of you need to give me the tools to be resilient. A way for departments to implement that, but also a way to balance the ownership to the candidate. You find one should lay heavier than the other?
Um, well, I think people are better off and more resilient when they take control of their own life.
Mm-hmm.
And that resilience is helpful through a career as a first responder. So the more you take on yourself, the better off you're going to be. Now, a department has a responsibility to make sure the health and wellness situations around the role are as strong and as they can be. But it's like the old saying, you can lead the horse to water, you can't make them drink it. So you can
100%.
have these programs,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but people have to accept them. And I think, unfortunately, right now, I think society has a lot of, in general, has a lot of suspicion of programs, and
Mm-hmm.
which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. So I think sometimes when the department overreaches and um,
Yeah. What's
brings
the
out a
second
program
agenda?
that,
I know what you
yeah,
mean. Yeah.
right, like it can be seen as an agenda, it can be seen
Yeah.
as a problem, uh, while people aren't meaning it that way.
Right.
It can be taken that way,
Yeah.
so I think it's those kind of programs that are around health and wellness. I think the staff have to have a lot of input around it,
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that these are not my idea, but our idea.
I like that.
And as long as we're all owning those ideas and those programs,
Mm-hmm.
then we can actually lessen those suspicions. People will
Mm-hmm.
take them up. So I think this is something that a lot of departments struggle with, is the shared visions.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, they tend to think they're the smartest guy in the room all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the problem becomes, is
Awesome.
you're too focused. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's going to be, those are the best programs, is when we develop them as a team,
Yeah.
or whatever your organizational team is, develop them as a team, and also from day one, hire the people who are more apt to adapt to the programs. You got to hire the right people,
Well,
and
no different than
hiring
the
is
prevention. Yeah. Right.
exactly,
The work is
hiring the
done in
right
the
people is
preventative manner.
huge.
Right. Well, that's
Yeah.
great, Tim. Lastly, I wanted to just touch on a topic that's, a little bit controversial in today's space, but I'm sort of very near and dear to my own self. And not to say that you're necessarily too familiar with it, maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but as a chief, but also a retirement age, a human being in their own right, with the introduction with trauma therapy and what we're sort of working towards in the first responder space, military, sort of in service, people that show up and, succumb to these sort of pressures of the job. working with the psychedelic space now in the trauma therapy space. And I, again, if you just, wear a few hats as not only a fire chief, a union president, a firefighter in his own right, but now retired, and maybe someone that might be having some, not some problems, but again, recovering from your medical incident and the stresses of this psychologically, physically, hormonally, all of it. I'll just share a psychedelic therapy session that I had facilitated with my therapist was literally a life changing experience. And we know now this is not in the woo anymore. This is founded and factual. Whether it's Gulf War veterans, we know this is used in the U.S. military. We know it's used abroad. Any insights there, or sort of whether it's as a fire chief, we were aware of this, we looked at it, some of our people, but it wasn't there yet. Maybe just some sights in your sort of personal perspective on that, Tim. And if you're not familiar, either way. So,
You know what, Kyle, I'm really not familiar enough to speak of it, in
okay,
any real fashion. I do know that people have had good experiences in
hmm
and so I think it's one of those things that, again, we should always continue to learn.
hmm
And as any organization, when things can help your staff and help
sure,
people
why
that you're
not?
working
Right.
with, you should look into it and make sure that it's available, or
Mm.
that the safeguards around it as it's being developed are there for people.
Fair. Yeah,
Because
and a vetted viable service as well, because a lot of people will seek underground help if they think it's the best option for them, and to be able to put it out of the shadows and make it available is a big piece.
So
Mm.
safety is always
Of
important,
course.
right? You can't say that enough. I mean, people need to, if especially when they're in a vulnerable state,
Right.
um, that safety is even more important, because
Right.
perhaps when we're in that vulnerable state, we don't make the best decisions
Well,
at in the moment, right?
charlatans masking as professionals as well. And we see that all over. There's literally a term called psychedelic tourism, which happens in people all over the world, whether it's firefighters, police, ambulance, whatever,
Sure.
accountants, librarians. People are succumbing to some stresses of today's life, and they're seeking betterment. They're still seeking help in the form of an unprecedented form of medicine and therapy. And we know this is very effective. There's factual studies. Myself is walking, talking proof. It literally changed my life in the most beautiful way,
Yeah.
Tim. And I was very fortunate to work with a very accredited therapist. But I will admit to the viewers out there that this was sort of on the underground. And I think, Tim, I was employed at the time, but off on leave, starting to succumb to some of the stresses and sort of somatic symptoms of the experiences that I had endured. Um, but I'm sort of a walking, I don't want to say anomaly, but I was not okay with not being okay, meaning that I didn't necessarily
Right.
have a crash course or a pending, I was suicidal to the brink of destruction, but I knew that something was not right. And I sort of just quested in my own health and wellness journey and started exploring, like yourself, educating, reading, interviewing, asking testimonials. And I discovered sort of this type of work. And it's interesting. I just wanted to share for you, Tim, and you maybe weren't aware of this, but there are some, I guess, you're aware of some of the courses and retreat models, sort of therapeutic models that are available to first responders. But just to give you personal reference, I applied through this to our conventional insurance company resources that the sort of structure sets for us as a career, and it was denied access to this program. And the reality was the reasoning was for lack of medical evidence. And not to get into a whole politically charged argument here, but that is absolute hullabaloo is the word, or nonsense, baloney, what do you want to say, because this is literally factually founded. And one of my colleagues, a same tenure colleague, had been accepted to the same program. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's still in 2024, 2025, still at this really kind of, breakthrough position. But I think one of my duties here with the Man Up podcast is not only to bring amazing people like yourself on board to share experiences, but to bring some light and maybe shed some, I don't like to use the word awareness, because awareness means we're talking about it, but what are the actionable items to actually put things into play? So I think for people like yourself and I, Tim, to sort of bring a little bit of the maybe just vulnerability to speak, like I'm not aware of it, but I do think there's a place for it to be come through with someone that wears the hat of a fire chief, to be able to say I'm open to this. I think there's a lot of impact. And for someone like myself, in a 20-year mark in a career, that was affected by said career, but yet had an amazing cause and effect by working with this type of therapy. I think it deserves a lot of momentum and a little bit more exposure. So that's why I brought it up. But I appreciate your open-mindedness to it. I know a lot of people, well, if it's illegal, it's illegal. And I know there's a lot of bureaucracy that goes with whether that legality stamp happens or not. Parts of the world, it's okay. In other parts, it's not. But I think we're seeing it come through in the forefront. And again, I'll reference again sports teams, gentlemen with, concussion injuries from combat sports. You see a lot of addiction people are making a lot of breakthroughs at, whether it's substance abuse in the region where I'm in right now. And I think I can just sort of pull the wool off of expose myself here. I've traveled, and the reason why I came, relocated my family, was to seek this type of work. And I've been working with practitioners and therapists abroad to be able to not only uncover a little bit more about what's going on with me, but working with them to impose and curriculate sort of curriculum that can be shared not only to men, but to first responders alike that are seeking this type of treatment. And that's what's brought this Man Up project together. So just to give you some context there.
Yeah, well, I think keeping an open mind is always important, Kyle. I think it's not called the science of medicine, right? It's called the practice, and
Right.
so they're always learning. They're always morphing and changing and becoming better. And I think at one point, if you take, for example, the inoculations for COVID, there was a lot of worry about that. And, there still is, but that was developed and it changed, and that kind of
Right.
inoculation changed significantly because of a reason. And so things we wouldn't have even
Always
thought about the
evolving.
mRNA. Right. Yeah, it's
Right.
evolving,
Right.
things change, things become more normalized, and potentially this is one of those things that's going to become more normalized, and if it's helping
Yeah.
people, hopefully it does, right?
Well, we've always said that if it's not harming people, what does it matter to you? Individually, you can have the choice, but I think the statistics are staggering. Look no further than the Joe Rogan podcast or any of the sort of major news sources that we all look to in today's world. It's really, there's no more shadows of unknown. The resources are right there, so you can take it, leave it at your own regard. But I appreciate you speaking open to that, and not knowing is one thing we've been told in the fire service. I'm not going to bullshit and say something I don't know about. We say no, I'll go find out and I'll get back to you. So
Yeah,
perfect
absolutely.
example of walking the walk, talking the talk. One last, I'll just leave you with this, Tim. I know we're getting long in the tooth. I can talk to you for days. I appreciate your openness and your schedule clear for us. Going forward, we want to sort of wrap it back up and sort of package this with the whole structure behind the Man Up podcast was to sort of bring some eyes and awareness into what we're calling the Man Up method. And the Man Up method, I'll just say to the viewers, and Tim, I know you're familiar with this. We've spoken through it over the last year or so in your personal journey, but also as a bit of a go to Tim sometimes for a little bit of his perspective, and he's been a great consultant along the way on my journey personally and professionally. Coming forward, bringing this Man Up method, we really sort of worked into a 3-pillar approach: mind, body, and spirit. We use the analogy of the triangle, with one side being out of square. It really isn't the structure that it is capacity of. And we look at our day-to-day lives, applying a good sound psychological structure, a good sound, we call it spirit, but sort of emotional, spiritual connection. It doesn't have to be religion. It doesn't have to be some sort of seance ritual, but just understanding the connection with a bit of a mindfulness component is really, really a big part of our lives. And then, of course, our physical element. And when I say physical, Tim, I think you speak perfectly to that. On paper, fit, healthy lifestyle, but under the hood, we popped the hood and we had some issues going on with our heart. So biological heart health is a marker that I used to specify on. You might look the part, 6-pack, gun show, all the deal, but what's going on under the skin? So really advocating for those 3 pillars approach going forward. And we're hoping that the Man Up method, which is basically a curriculum from the moment our eyes open to the moment our eyes close at night. Now, this isn't this purist, you can no longer look at a potato chip or a beverage of any such. You can't enjoy yourself, by no means. This is meant to be implicated in a lifestyle approach to encompass a body lifestyle approach of health and wellness in all facets, but where we've injected or bolstered a few of the areas that I think have been overlooked for decades. is again in that psychological and into the sort of mindful spiritual element. I think you spoke to well today, Tim. You don't have to have this esoteric 2 hour spiritual meditation poise, but it's a moment where maybe I went outside and I put my feet in the dirt today and I took 5 deep breaths and welcomed in some gratitude. In the morning before I jump up and grab my phone and check out today's events, I take a moment to just take some breaths and realize what's sort of really important to me, ground myself and have a moment of gratitude practice. In the evening, instead of watching Netflix before we go to bed and eat a bag of Doritos, we go on the ground, and this was part of the Silverfit curriculum that we did some stretching, we did some mobility work, we let our body sort of unwind, prepare ourselves for sleep, get the 8-10 hours of sleep. We wake up the next day feeling rested, and off we go. So it's a snowball analogy, it's a lifestyle approach. And I just want to speak to you personally, Tim, that I really admire and appreciate you for implementing these practices, not only throughout your career and your life as a human being, Tim Wilkinson, but also as a fire chief, having opportunities to implement in your department to show the best result for your people and your employees, but also now in a retirement state, almost coming back to the basics and understanding that these might be more important than ever to make sure you have a foundation to enjoy these so greatly earned golden years of your life. And I think we spoke to this before the camera started rolling. You work 35 years, the carrot of retirement is dangling. And unfortunately, so many of us, probably friends and family of yours that aren't here today, unfortunately, due to some sort of tragedy or laid up in a hospital bed or on a respirator at their home, and they're not able to enjoy these golden years of our life with the grandchildren and all the rest. So I really appreciate you taking full spectrum, not only advocation, but consulting along the way, helping me to create the Man Up method, which I'm so very proud of and so very excited with a new launch coming up soon. We'll make sure to make that available to the masses as soon as possible. But once again, Tim, thank you so much today, and thank you for your open-mindedness. Thank you for your perspective, your information, and you've sort of always been a mentor figure in my life, a father figure, not to put you into the old man status, but and a friend as well. So I really appreciate you and appreciate you taking time to speak with us today and bring the Man Up project in the entirety to life and give it some of the credibility and notoriety that it deserves.
Well, thanks so much, Kyle. It's been great chatting with you again today. I always learn something more each time we talk, and
Awesome.
It's been a lot of fun to go through the programs, and I'll look forward to seeing all the new information.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and absolutely honored to have you on board, Tim. And bringing forward like yourself, we've got plans going into the future to potentially work. I think you and I have talked very briefly about sort of consulting on projects where we actually go back to department heads and see if we can't implement this type of curriculum from a structured base to bring it to their employees going forward from day one. Recruit walks in the hall. This is our recommendation. These are our SOPs and our SOGs, but they're not just in operational guides. These are in personal development matters. And we do have an on-site psychologist. We do have an on-site somatic breath practice. Like, these are things that were woo-woo and esoteric, but now we understand their structure and some real desire and need to have these built in from the ground up. And with people like you, Tim, that wear those hats and the 5 gold bars on the shoulder bring some weight and they bring some clout. The guy with me, just eat your vegetables and do your workout, sometimes gets lost in the weeds. So I think collectively we can make some real impact, and I just appreciate having you on board for the ride.
Well, you're most welcome, and it's great to chat.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tim.
Thanks
everybody
soon.
for tuning in. We'll see you really soon. We're gonna have Tim back at a later day. We'll get into some more juicier details, if you will. But today was full spectrum, kind of touching each end of the coin here. So thank you so much, Tim, and look forward to future interviews.
Thanks a lot, Kyle. Yeah.
All right. Bye for now.